My son walked into my living room holding divorce papers and said it's over. I grabbed my pen and signed something else right there. When he read it, the color drained from his face and he whispered, "Mom, what have you done?" Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 68 years old. For the past 43 years, I've lived in the same house where I raised 3 beautiful children and built a life alongside my late husband, Robert. When people look at me now, they see an ordinary grandmother with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. They see someone who bakes cookies and tends rose gardens. But what they don't see is the woman who sacrificed everything to build an empire from absolutely nothing. When Robert started his construction business in our garage back in 1982, I was the one answering phones at midnight, balancing books at the kitchen table after the kids went to sleep, and skipping meals so we could pay our workers on time. I had been accepted to art school on a full scholarship, but I gave that up when I got pregnant with Daniel. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back someday. That day never came. After Robert died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, everyone expected the business to crumble. But I held it together. I made the tough decisions, negotiated the critical contracts, and kept 30 employees from losing their jobs. My son Daniel became CEO, but I was the one working behind the scenes, the invisible force keeping everything running. And I never asked for recognition. I never demanded a salary or a title. I just did what mothers do. I gave everything and expected nothing in return. I've spent the last 5 years being the family's cornerstone. I babysit my grandchildren every Thursday without fail. I host Sunday dinners where everyone gathers around my table. I volunteer at the senior center on Wednesdays, helping people lonelier than myself. I've sewn Halloween costumes, attended every soccer game, and never missed a birthday. I thought I was building a legacy of love, creating bonds that could never be broken. I was wrong. What I didn't know was that my own son had been plotting against me for 18 months, planning to take everything I'd worked for and erase me from existence. And it all started with those papers he handed me that Tuesday afternoon. Before everything fell apart, my life had a beautiful, predictable rhythm that I cherished deeply. Every morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock, even though I didn't have to anymore. Old habits from raising 3 kids and running a household never really leave you. I'd make myself a cup of coffee, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, just the way Robert used to make it for me, and sit on the back porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My rose garden was my pride and joy. Robert had planted the first bush for me on our 10th anniversary. A beautiful red rose, he said, reminded him of my strength. Over the years, I'd added more. Yellows, whites, peach-colored ones that bloomed twice a season. I'd spend those quiet morning hours pruning, watering, talking to them like old friends. The neighbors probably thought I was crazy, but those roses listened better than most people. Tuesdays and Thursdays were my favorite days. That's when I had my grandchildren, Emma and little Robert, named after his grandfather. Emma was 7. With wild curly hair she refused to let me brush. Little Robert was 5, with gap-toothed smile that melted my heart every single time. I'd make them chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast, help Emma with her reading homework, and build elaborate block towers with Robert that we'd knock down laughing. They called me Mimi, and hearing that word made every sacrifice worth it. Wednesdays belonged to the senior center, where I volunteered serving lunch and organizing activities. I'd play cards with the regulars, listen to their stories, and help those who couldn't remember if they'd taken their medications. It felt good to be needed, to be useful, to matter in someone's day. Sunday dinners were sacred in our family. I'd start preparing Saturday afternoon, pot roast with roasted vegetables, homemade rolls that filled the house with the smell of butter and yeast, and my famous apple pie that Daniel used to beg for as a child. I'd set the table with my mother's china, the delicate plates with tiny blue flowers that had survived 3 generations. Daniel and Laura would arrive with the kids, and sometimes my daughter Sarah would video call from Seattle. We'd sit around that table, and I'd look at their faces and think, this is what I built. This is my legacy. I had no idea that behind those smiles, behind those Sunday dinners and thank you hugs, a plan was already in motion to destroy everything. It started with something so small that I almost missed it completely. We were having our usual Sunday dinner, pot roast, roasted carrots, those buttermilk biscuits Daniel had always loved. Everyone was gathered around the table, and the conversation was flowing naturally until I mentioned something that seemed completely innocent at the time. "I've been thinking about updating my will," I said casually, cutting into my roast. "My attorney called last week and suggested I review everything since it's been a few years. You know, just to make sure everything is current and proper." The room didn't go silent exactly, but something changed. It was like someone had turned down the volume on a song you'd been enjoying. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Laura's hand tightened around her wine glass, her knuckles going white for just a second. They looked at each other across the table, and it wasn't a normal glance between husband and wife. It was loaded with meaning, with something I couldn't quite read but felt in my stomach like a stone dropping into water. "Oh, well, that's probably smart, Mom," Daniel said too quickly, his voice just a little too bright. "Actually, Laura and I were just talking about estate planning. Weren't we, honey?" Laura nodded, recovering her composure with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, it's so important to have everything organized. You know, at your age." At your age. The words hung in the air like smoke. I was 68, not ancient, but the way she said it made me feel like I had one foot in the grave already. Later that evening, I was coming back from the bathroom when I heard Laura's voice drifting from the hallway. She was on her phone, her back to me, speaking in a low, urgent tone. "No, not yet. We need to wait for the right timing. The paperwork has to be perfect, and she needs to be in the right state of mind when we present it." I must have made a noise because Laura spun around, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second before that practiced smile returned. "Oh, Margaret, just talking to my sister about her refinancing. So boring." She laughed, but it sounded forced, like glass breaking. "Anyway, we should get the kids home, school night and all." That night, lying in bed, I replayed those moments over and over. The look between Daniel and Laura, the phone call, Laura's strange choice of words. Something was off, like a picture frame hanging just slightly crooked. You might not notice it immediately, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I told myself I was being paranoid. These were my children, my family. They loved me, didn't they? I spent the next week trying to convince myself that I was losing my mind, that grief and loneliness were making me see conspiracies where there were none. Every time that nagging feeling crept back into my thoughts, I pushed it down like a stubborn weed I didn't want growing in my garden. Maybe Daniel and Laura were just concerned about me. After all, I was living alone in this big house, and last month I had forgotten to lock the back door before going to bed. Daniel had found it open the next morning when he stopped by, and he'd been worried. Any good son would be worried about his elderly mother's safety, right? That's what I told myself as I lay awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling fan going round and round. And the questions about my finances, those were probably just responsible adult children making sure their mother was taken care of. Daniel had always been practical, even as a boy. He'd saved his allowance while his siblings spent theirs on candy. Of course, he'd want to know that I had everything in order, that my accounts were managed properly, that I wouldn't struggle if something happened. It was thoughtful, really, when I looked at it from that angle. Laura's comment about the assisted living facility, well, she was always the practical one, sometimes to the point of being cold, but that was just her personality. Some people show love through planning and logistics rather than warm hugs and compliments. She'd probably driven past that facility and thought of me living alone, and in her mind, she was being helpful. She meant well. She had to mean well. I threw myself into my routines with almost desperate energy. I baked 3 different types of cookies for the senior center. I spent extra hours in my rose garden, deadheading every spent bloom until my hands cramped. I reorganized my entire kitchen, scrubbing shelves that were already clean. When Thursday came, I held Emma and little Robert a little tighter, read them an extra story, made them extra special grilled cheese sandwiches cut into star shapes the way they liked. I was trying to prove something, though I didn't want to admit what. Maybe if I was useful enough, needed enough, loving enough, then whatever I'd sensed couldn't possibly be real. Maybe if I was the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother, the perfect glue holding this family together, then no one would ever want to hurt me. But deep in my heart, in that place where mothers keep their darkest fears, I knew something was terribly wrong. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. Denial felt safer than the truth. So I smiled, I baked, I pretended, and I waited for the other shoe to drop. The truth has a way of finding you, even when you're desperately trying to avoid it. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after that uncomfortable Sunday dinner. I was looking for my reading glasses, which I had a terrible habit of misplacing around the house. I'd already checked the kitchen, the living room, and my bedroom, so I wandered into the small office at the end of the hallway. Robert had used it for paperwork when he was alive, and after he passed, Daniel would sometimes use it when he visited, spreading out documents and making business calls. I rarely went in there anymore. It felt too empty, too full of memories that still hurt. I was checking the desk drawer, thinking maybe I'd left my glasses there during spring cleaning, when my hand brushed against a manila folder tucked toward the back. It wasn't mine. I pulled it out, telling myself I was just moving it to look underneath, but curiosity got the better of me. The moment I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were property appraisal documents for my house, professional ones, with detailed estimates and market comparisons. My home was apparently worth over $2 million now. The neighborhood had become highly desirable over the years. There were brochures for nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and not the nice ones Laura had casually mentioned. These were budget facilities with shared rooms and institutional cafeteria photographs. Someone had circled the monthly costs in red pen: $1,500, $2,000, bargain basement prices for warehousing the elderly. But it was the handwritten note, paper-clipped to the front of everything, that made my hands start trembling. I recognized Laura's handwriting immediately. She'd written enough birthday cards over the years. The note read, "Once she signs the POA, we move forward with the sale. Attorney confirms conservatorship is easier than we thought if we can document confusion or medical issues. Timeline, 2 to 3 months max." POA, power of attorney. They were planning to take control of my life, my assets, everything. The appraisals were dated from last month. This wasn't some passing thought. This was a calculated plan that had been in motion for God knows how long. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out right there. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page, every document, every handwritten note. I made sure the images were clear, that every word was readable. Then I carefully placed the folder back exactly as I'd found it, making sure it was positioned at the same angle, pushed back to the same spot. That evening, Daniel called to check on me, his voice warm and concerned. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to see how you're doing. Laura and I were thinking, have you given any more thought to simplifying things? We really think it would take so much stress off your shoulders if you'd let us help manage some of your affairs. We could meet with our attorney next week, get some simple paperwork signed. Nothing major, just making things easier for you." I held the phone with white knuckles, staring at the photographs on my phone screen. "That's so sweet of you to think of me, honey," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady and light. "Let me think about it a little more, okay? I'll let you know." After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room and finally let myself admit the horrible truth. My own son was plotting to steal everything from me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at those photographs on my phone, trying to make sense of how the son I'd raised could do this to me. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how much it would hurt. The next morning, I called an attorney, not the family lawyer Daniel had suggested, but someone completely independent. A woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for being fierce and thorough. 2 days later, I sat in her modern downtown office, my hands clutched around my purse, and showed her everything I'd found. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said gently after reviewing the documents, "I think we need to dig deeper. Would you be willing to hire a private investigator? I have someone I trust completely." I nodded, unable to speak. Within a week, the investigator had accessed email records, text messages, and phone logs that Daniel and Laura had never imagined anyone would see. What Patricia showed me 2 weeks later destroyed whatever hope I'd been clinging to. She laid out printed emails across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene, and in a way, that's exactly what they were. Evidence of a crime against my heart, my trust, my entire life. The planning had started 18 months ago, 18 months of smiles and Sunday dinners while they plotted behind my back. In one email, Laura had written to Daniel, "The old bat is sitting on prime real estate while we're drowning in mortgage payments. She doesn't need a house that big. She doesn't need anything but a bed and 3 meals a day." Daniel's response made my stomach turn. "I know. Mom's been living off Dad's legacy for too long. That business, that house, it should be ours. We've earned it. She just exists there like some ghost haunting our inheritance." There were emails to real estate agents inquiring about quick sales, text messages between Laura and her sister calling me the obstacle, and joking about how I'd probably last forever out of spite. There was a detailed timeline with checkpoints: get medical documentation of cognitive decline, secure power of attorney, file for conservatorship, sell the house, liquidate assets, place her in the cheapest facility possible. But the worst part, the part that made Patricia put her hand on my shoulder as I started to cry, was an email Daniel sent to Laura just 3 weeks ago. "Sometimes I wish Mom would just have another health scare. It would make this whole thing so much easier. Dad's heart attack was quick and clean. Why can't she be like that?" My son had wished me dead, not in anger, not in a moment of frustration, but as a calculated business decision. I had carried him in my body for 9 months, nursed him through pneumonia when he was 6, worked double shifts to pay for his college education, and he saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle between him and money. Patricia handed me tissues as I sobbed in her office, grieving not for what I was about to lose, but for the son who had already died. The Daniel I thought I knew had never existed, or perhaps he'd died somewhere along the way, suffocated by greed and entitlement I'd never seen coming. "Mrs. Thompson," Patricia said quietly, "they've already started forging your signature on preliminary documents. They've transferred some business assets. This isn't just a plan anymore. It's already in motion. We need to act now or you'll lose everything." I looked up at her through my tears and said the words that would change everything. "Tell me what I need to do." Over the next week, Patricia and her investigator uncovered a conspiracy so elaborate and cruel that I could barely comprehend its scope. This wasn't just about money or property. It was a systematic plan to erase me from existence, to rewrite reality itself until I became the confused, helpless old woman they needed me to be. Daniel had been laying groundwork for months that I'd been completely blind to. He'd been calling my extended family, my sister Ruth in Florida, my cousins in Ohio, even my oldest friend Joan, who I'd known since high school, telling them I was struggling mentally. He'd say things like, "Mom's been getting confused lately. She repeats herself a lot. Sometimes she forgets we visited. The doctor thinks it might be early dementia." He'd done it so carefully, so convincingly, that everyone believed him, because why wouldn't they? He was the devoted son, the concerned caregiver. That's why Ruth hadn't called in 3 months. That's why my cousin Patricia stopped responding to my emails. That's why Joan had suddenly become too busy for our weekly lunches. Daniel had told Joan I'd been saying hurtful, paranoid things, and that it was better to give me space. He'd poisoned every relationship I had, isolating me so completely that when he finally made his move, I'd have no one to turn to, no one who would believe me over him. But the cruelty went even deeper. Patricia discovered that Daniel had been accompanying me to my doctor appointments for the past 6 months, something I'd thought was sweet and caring. During those visits, he'd pull my doctor aside privately and express concern about my anxiety and memory issues. He'd mention incidents that never happened. Mom left the stove on 3 times last week, or she got lost driving to the grocery store she's been going to for 30 years. My doctor, Dr. Morrison, who I'd trusted for 15 years, had believed my own son over me. He'd prescribed anti-anxiety medications and sleeping pills, saying they'd help me feel more settled. I'd taken them faithfully because I trusted him. What I didn't know was that those medications, in the combinations and dosages prescribed, were causing the very symptoms Daniel was reporting. The dizziness, the confusion, the foggy thinking I'd been experiencing for months. It wasn't age, it wasn't disease, it was pharmaceutical manipulation. They were literally drugging you into compliance, Patricia explained, her voice tight with anger, making you appear exactly as incompetent as they needed you to seem for a conservatorship case. And here's the worst part. They'd already filed preliminary paperwork with the court. They have a hearing date scheduled for 6 weeks from now. The investigator slid another document across the table. It was a purchase agreement for my house, signed by Daniel as representative for Margaret Thompson, pending conservatorship approval. They'd already found a buyer, a young tech couple willing to pay $2.3 million cash. The closing date was set for 2 months away. They've thought of everything, Patricia continued. They have a storage unit rented for your belongings. Just one 10-by-10 unit for 43 years of your life. They've already contacted the nursing facility and put down a deposit. They've calculated their profits down to the dollar. After the house sale, after settling your accounts, after placing you in that facility, they're walking away with approximately $2.8 million. I sat there, numb, as she showed me spreadsheets Daniel had created. Line items for every asset I owned, every account, every possession, all reduced to numbers on a balance sheet. There was even a line item labeled furniture disposal with an estimated value of $500. My mother's china, my wedding photos, Robert's watch collection, my grandmother's quilts, all of it dismissed as $500 worth of disposal fees. This wasn't betrayal. This was complete annihilation. They weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing my identity, my history, my very existence. And they'd been doing it slowly, carefully, systematically for 18 months while I baked them cookies and babysat their children. That night, I went home to my empty house and completely fell apart. I didn't make dinner, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled from the shelves, and let the grief consume me like a physical force crushing my chest. I opened the album from Daniel's childhood and stared at pictures I'd looked at 1,000 times, but now they felt like evidence from a crime scene. There he was at age 3, gap-toothed and giggling in my arms at the beach. I remembered that day so clearly. He'd been afraid of the waves until I held his hand and walked into the water with him, showing him there was nothing to fear. I'd been his protector, his safe place. There he was at 7, dressed as a superhero for Halloween in a costume I'd stayed up until 2 in the morning sewing because store-bought ones weren't good enough for my boy. His face was glowing with joy. His high school graduation, where he'd thanked me in his valedictorian speech and said, "Everything I am, I owe to my mother." I'd cried tears of pride that day, sitting in those uncomfortable auditorium seats, thinking all the sacrifice had been worth it. His wedding day, where he danced with me and whispered, "You're the best mom in the world. I love you so much." Had that been a lie too? Or had something died in him between then and now? I moved to another album, the one documenting the business my husband built. There were pictures of Robert and me in front of our first office, barely more than a shed, both of us young and hopeful and terrified. There I was, 8 months pregnant with Daniel, answering phones and filing permits. There we were at our first major project completion, covered in dust and exhausted and happy. And there was a picture I'd forgotten about. Me at the desk late at night, months after Robert died. Paperwork spread everywhere, my face exhausted but determined. Sarah had taken that photo saying, "Mom, you're holding everything together." I had held it together. I'd saved that business. I'd saved Daniel's inheritance. And this was how he repaid me. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, the sound of a mother grieving a child who hadn't died but had become something unrecognizable. I'd given him life, nursed him through every illness, celebrated every achievement, forgiven every mistake. I'd sacrificed my dreams, my education, my career, my identity. I'd poured everything I was into, making sure he had everything he needed. And he saw me as nothing more than an obstacle, an inconvenience, a problem to be eliminated and profited from. When had I stopped being his mother and become just a bank account with a heartbeat? When had love turned into resentment? When had my son become a stranger capable of wishing me dead? I thought about the medications I'd been taking faithfully, trusting my doctor, trusting Daniel's concern. They'd been poisoning me slowly, deliberately, making me doubt my own mind. Every dizzy spell, every moment of confusion, it had been manufactured. They'd been gaslighting me chemically, making me feel like I was losing myself so they could take everything. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't a moment of anger or a rash decision. This was calculated, planned, executed over 18 months with spreadsheets and timelines and forged documents. They'd discussed me over dinner, probably in my own house after Sunday meals I'd prepared with love. They'd laughed about me, called me names, reduced me to an obstacle. I looked at myself in the mirror across the room and barely recognized the broken woman staring back. My eyes were red and swollen, my face aged by grief. My shoulders slumped under the weight of betrayal. I looked exactly like the helpless, confused old woman they wanted me to be. And that's when something shifted. Through the tears and the pain, a spark of anger began to burn. A small voice in my head, it sounded like my own mother, strong and fierce, whispered, "You are Margaret Thompson. You survived poverty. You built a business from nothing. You held a company together when everyone said it would fail. You are not helpless. You are not done. Get up." I looked at that broken woman in the mirror and said out loud, my voice cracking but growing stronger, "Get up, Margaret. Get up and fight back." I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Maybe it was because I'd stopped taking those medications Daniel had pushed on me, or maybe it was because I'd finally cried out all the weakness and self-pity. Whatever the reason, I looked in the mirror and saw someone different. Not a victim, not a confused old woman, a warrior. I made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in weeks, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen. If they wanted to play games with paperwork and planning, fine. I'd invented that game. I'd built $1 million business doing exactly this kind of strategic thinking. They'd forgotten who taught Daniel everything he knew about planning and execution. Me. I called Patricia Chen and said 5 words that felt like throwing off chains. I want to fight back. Not just defend myself, not just protect my assets. I wanted to make them face consequences for what they'd tried to do. Patricia's voice on the other end of the line changed, became sharper, more energized. "Now we're talking. Come to my office this afternoon. Bring everything you have, and let's build a case." Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I'd never been before. Strategic, calculating, secretive. I played the role they expected, the sweet, slightly confused elderly mother, while quietly gathering ammunition behind the scenes. When Daniel visited, I smiled and nodded and asked forgetful questions I already knew the answers to. I let him think his plan was working perfectly. But the moment he left, I was on the phone with Patricia, documenting every conversation. I installed hidden cameras throughout my house, tiny, virtually invisible ones that a private security company set up in a single afternoon. Every room now recorded video and audio, every conversation, every private moment when Daniel and Laura thought they were alone in my kitchen or living room, all of it was being captured. I went to a different doctor, one Daniel didn't know about, and had a complete medical evaluation. Blood tests proved the medications I'd been taking were causing cognitive impairment. My new doctor, Dr. Sarah Kim, was horrified when I explained the situation. She documented everything meticulously, writing detailed reports about pharmaceutical abuse and the symptoms of the drugs I'd been given. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, shaking her head in disgust, "you're sharp as a tack. There's nothing wrong with your mind. What they did to you, it's criminal." I contacted my bank and created a living trust, transferring all my liquid assets into it with an independent trustee and my daughter, Sarah, as co-trustee. Daniel would have no access, no control, no way to touch a single penny, even if he somehow got that power of attorney he wanted. I updated my will with Patricia's help, removing Daniel completely. Everything would go to Sarah, my grandchildren, and several charities I'd always supported. I gathered every forged document, every falsified signature, every fraudulent transfer Daniel had already made. Patricia's investigator found even more evidence: emails to the nursing facility, conversations with real estate agents, text messages between Daniel and Laura discussing how to handle me if I resisted. I reached out to my family members one by one, Ruth, my cousins, Joan, and explained what had been happening. At first, some were skeptical, confused by the conflicting stories. But when I showed them the evidence, the emails where Daniel discussed manipulating them, their shock turned to anger on my behalf. Joan cried on the phone, apologizing for believing Daniel's lies. Ruth booked a flight to come stay with me. My family wasn't gone. It had just been temporarily stolen, and now I was taking it back. I even prepared something Patricia suggested might be necessary: a video recording of myself, clear-eyed and articulate, explaining the entire situation. Insurance, she called it. If something happens to you, if they somehow succeed in having you declared incompetent, this video proves your mental state right now. It's your voice, your truth, permanently recorded. Every piece was falling into place. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was building a trap. And Daniel was about to walk right into it. The scared, broken woman from 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place stood Margaret Thompson, and she was done being a victim. Patricia and I spent 3 weeks crafting a plan so perfect, so airtight, that Daniel wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. We met in her office almost daily, sometimes joined by the private investigator, sometimes by a criminal attorney she'd brought in, who specialized in elder abuse cases. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be calculated. "The key," Patricia explained, spreading documents across her conference table, "is letting him think he's winning right up until the moment we spring the trap. We need him confident, careless, and completely exposed." The foundation was already laid. My assets were secured in the trust, untouchable by Daniel or any conservatorship order. My new doctor had documented my perfect cognitive health and the pharmaceutical manipulation I'd endured. We had 18 months of emails, text, and recorded conversations proving conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft. But Patricia wanted more. She wanted Daniel to commit new crimes, fresh ones, on camera. "We're going to give him exactly what he wants," she said with a thin smile, "or at least make him think we are." I called Daniel on a Tuesday evening, making my voice sound tired and a little confused. "Honey, I've been thinking about what you and Laura said, about simplifying things. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am getting too old to handle everything on my own. I get so tired these days. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I delivered it perfectly. I could hear the excitement in Daniel's voice, barely contained. Mom, that's wonderful. That's such a smart decision. Laura and I just want what's best for you. How about we set up a meeting? I'll bring our attorney, and we can get everything signed and sorted out. Would this Saturday work? Saturday sounds perfect, dear. I'll make lunch. The dutiful mother, right to the end. Over the next few days, I prepared my house like a stage. The hidden cameras were repositioned for optimal coverage of the dining room where we'd meet. I had a tiny recording device in my cardigan pocket. My phone was set up to live stream to Patricia's office, so she and the criminal attorney could watch everything in real time. Sarah flew in from Seattle and was waiting at a hotel nearby with Ruth, ready to arrive at a moment's notice if needed. I also prepared documents of my own, restraining orders, ready to be filed, a criminal complaint drafted and reviewed by the district attorney's office, who Patricia had already briefed on the case. They were very interested in prosecution. Elder abuse cases had become a priority, and Daniel's actions were textbook criminal behavior. Asset freezes, injunctions, emergency motions, everything was drafted, reviewed, and ready to file the moment I gave the word. Patricia had even contacted the real estate buyers who thought they were purchasing my house. Their attorney was shocked to learn the sale was fraudulent and immediately withdrew from the transaction. They were prepared to testify if needed about Daniel's misrepresentation. I printed out the worst of Daniel's emails and texts, the ones where he wished me dead, called me the old bat, discussed drugging me into compliance. I put them in a folder marked for Daniel with dark humor I didn't know I possessed. Friday night, I barely slept, but it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. I spent the hours reviewing everything one last time, making sure every detail was perfect. I thought about what I'd say, how I'd reveal the truth. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to unleash all the pain and betrayal, but the smarter part of me, the strategic part, knew that calm, controlled exposure would be far more devastating. Saturday morning, I woke up early and got ready with deliberate care. I wore my best dress, navy blue, the one I'd worn to Daniel's wedding. I did my hair and makeup. I wanted to look sharp, competent, and completely unlike the confused old woman he expected. I made lunch as promised. Sandwiches, salad, lemonade. The perfect mother, one last time. At noon exactly, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, touched the recording device in my pocket to make sure it was running, and opened the door with a smile. "Hello, Daniel. Laura, please come in. Let's have a family meeting." Daniel walked through my front door with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He wore his expensive navy suit, the one I'd helped him pick out for important business meetings, and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Laura followed behind him in a cream-colored dress and heels, her smile practiced and cold. Behind them came a man I'd never met, mid-50s, silver hair, expensive watch, who introduced himself as Richard Brennan, their attorney. "Mom, you look wonderful," Daniel said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt like ice against my skin. "I'm so glad you've decided to do this. It's really the best thing for everyone." "Please, sit down." I gestured to the dining room table, where I'd set out lunch on my mother's good china. The same china we'd used for every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every family celebration for 40 years. I'd chosen it deliberately. Let them eat off the history they were trying to steal. They sat down, Daniel at the head of the table, my husband's seat, I noticed with a flash of anger, and Laura beside him. Mr. Brennan took the seat across from them, pulling documents from his briefcase with practiced efficiency. I sat at the opposite end, my hands folded calmly in my lap, though my heart was racing. What Daniel didn't know was that Patricia Chen was watching this entire scene unfold on a live stream from her office downtown. What he didn't know was that every word spoken in this room was being recorded by 3 separate devices. What he didn't know was that his world was about to collapse. "So, Mom," Daniel began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard so many times lately. Mr. Brennan has prepared all the paperwork we discussed. Power of attorney, which will allow Laura and me to help manage your finances and make decisions on your behalf. Nothing scary, just making sure you're taken care of. He smiled at me like I was a child who needed reassurance. Mr. Brennan slid a stack of documents across the table toward me. Mrs. Thompson, these are fairly standard estate planning documents. They'll simply allow your son to act on your behalf in financial and medical matters. Given your age and your son's concerns about your recent confusion, this is really the most prudent course of action. My recent confusion, the confusion they'd manufactured with medications and lies. Laura leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Margaret, we just love you so much and want to make sure you're safe and comfortable. This house is so big for you to manage alone. We've been looking at some wonderful communities where you'd have people your own age, activities, nurses on staff. Wouldn't that be nice? No more worrying about maintenance or cooking or any of those stressful things. I looked at the documents in front of me, then at the pen Mr. Brennan had placed beside them. Daniel was leaning back in his chair now, relaxed, his smile growing wider. He thought this was done. He thought I was about to sign away my life, my autonomy, my dignity. Before I sign anything, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I'd like to ask you something, Daniel. His smile flickered slightly. Of course, Mom. What is it? Do you remember what you said at your father's funeral? I watched his face carefully. You stood up at the podium and said that Dad taught you honor, integrity, and that family was everything. You said you'd carry on his legacy and make him proud. Do you remember that? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Mom, I don't see what... And at your wedding, I continued, my voice gaining strength, you told me I was the most important woman in your life, that everything you'd accomplished was because of my sacrifices. You cried, Daniel. Real tears. Were those real, or were you already planning this even then? The room went silent. Laura's smile had frozen on her face. Mr. Brennan looked confused, glancing between Daniel and me uncertainly. Mom, you're being emotional, Daniel said, his voice taking on an edge. This is exactly why we need to do this. You're getting confused, mixing up. I'm not confused, I said, and my voice was pure steel. I'm more clear-headed than I've been in months. You see, I stopped taking those medications you convinced Dr. Morrison to prescribe, the ones that were making me dizzy and forgetful, the ones that were giving you exactly the symptoms you needed to prove I was incompetent. Daniel's face went pale. Laura sat up straighter, her hand gripping her wine glass. I reached into the folder beside my plate and pulled out my own documents. I'm not signing your power of attorney, Daniel. I slid papers across the table, watching his eyes go wide as he tried to process what he was seeing. But I am signing these. His hands were shaking as he picked up the first document. I watched the blood drain from his face as he read, restraining order, criminal complaint, asset freeze, emergency injunction. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. What have you done? I smiled then, cold and sharp. What I should have done the moment I found your folder with the house appraisals and that note about conservatorship, the one that said, once she signs the POA, we move forward with the sale. Remember writing that, Laura? Laura's face went white as a sheet. What I've done, Daniel, is refuse to disappear quietly so you can profit from erasing me. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Mom, I don't know what you think you found, but... Don't, I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to slice through his excuses. Don't you dare lie to me anymore. I know everything, Daniel. Every email, every text message, every forged signature, every conversation you thought was private. I know about the 18 months of planning. I know about the nursing facility deposit. I know about the buyer you lined up for my house. I know what you called me in those messages to Laura. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a video file. Daniel's own voice filled the room, crystal clear. Sometimes I wish Mom would just have another health scare. It would make this whole thing so much easier. Dad's heart attack was quick and clean. Why can't she be like that? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Mr. Brennan looked horrified, pushing his chair back slightly as if to distance himself from his clients. That's taken out of context, Daniel stammered, his face flushing red now. I didn't mean out of context? I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Let me give you more context then. I pressed another button and Laura's voice played. The old bat is sitting on prime real estate while we're drowning in mortgage payments. She doesn't need anything but a bed and 3 meals a day. Laura stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't record private conversations. Actually, a new voice said from my living room, she can, especially in her own home. Patricia Chen walked into the dining room, followed by another attorney and a man in a police uniform. I'm Patricia Chen, Mrs. Thompson's attorney. This is Assistant District Attorney Michael Rodriguez and Officer Barnes. Daniel shot to his feet, panic flooding his features. What is this? This is the consequence of elder abuse, attempted fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft, Patricia said calmly, setting her own briefcase on the table. We've been documenting your actions for weeks, Daniel. Every conversation in this house has been recorded. Every forged document has been cataloged. Every fraudulent transfer you've already made has been traced. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, letting it fall onto the table with a heavy thud. Property appraisals you commissioned without your mother's knowledge, emails to real estate agents, text messages discussing how to drug her into compliance, medical records showing the medications you pressured Dr. Morrison to prescribe, medications that caused the exact symptoms you needed for a conservatorship case, forged signatures on business documents, preliminary conservatorship filings made without your mother's knowledge or consent. Mr. Brennan was frantically gathering his papers. I had no knowledge of any of this. I was told Mrs. Thompson was willing and that there were legitimate competency concerns. We know you were lied to, Mr. Brennan, Patricia said. You're not being charged, but your clients are. The ADA stepped forward, his expression stern. Daniel Thompson, Laura Thompson, you're both being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted elder abuse, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. This is ridiculous, Daniel shouted, his composure completely shattered now. She's my mother. I was trying to help her. She's confused. She's not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I said, standing up now, meeting my son's eyes across the table. You know why? Because I stopped taking the pills you convinced my doctor to give me. Pills that were making me foggy and dizzy and forgetful. Pills that were manufacturing the exact incompetency you needed to steal everything from me. I pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table like cards in a winning hand. Dr. Sarah Kim's medical evaluation conducted 2 weeks ago, completely clear, no cognitive impairment whatsoever, blood tests showing the medications in my system and their side effects, her professional opinion that I was being pharmaceutically manipulated. Laura was crying now, mascara running down her face. Daniel, do something. Tell them we were just trying to help. Help? I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. You called me the old bat. You discussed how my death would make things easier. You calculated your profits down to the dollar. You isolated me from my family by telling them I was losing my mind. You poisoned my relationships, my health, my sense of reality. You made me doubt myself, made me feel like I was going crazy. And you did it all while smiling at my Sunday dinners and letting me babysit your children. My voice broke on the last words, genuine emotion cracking through my controlled fury. I gave you everything, Daniel, everything. And you couldn't even wait for me to die naturally. You had to try to erase me while I was still alive." Daniel's face crumpled. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been shame or regret flash across his features, but then it hardened into anger. "You were supposed to be easy. You were supposed to be grateful. We were taking care of you. By stealing everything I worked for? By drugging me? By planning to warehouse me in the cheapest facility you could find while you lived in my house and spent my money?" I shook my head. "That's not care, Daniel. That's cruelty." Patricia placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Thompson has also filed civil suits for the fraudulent transfers you've already made. Every penny you took will be returned, with damages." Officer Barnes stepped forward with handcuffs. "We're not arresting you today, but you're both required to appear for arraignment on Monday. Do not attempt to contact Mrs. Thompson or access any of her accounts. The restraining orders are effective immediately." The weeks and months that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, court appearances, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life from the rubble Daniel had tried to create. But for the first time in 18 months, I could breathe freely. I could think clearly. I was myself again. The criminal case moved forward with surprising speed. The district attorney's office took elder abuse cases seriously, especially ones with such clear-cut evidence. Patricia had done her job brilliantly. Every email, every recorded conversation, every forged document was presented to the grand jury. Daniel and Laura were indicted on multiple felony counts: elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. The prosecution was aggressive and thorough. I attended every hearing, sitting in the courtroom with Sarah beside me and Ruth holding my hand. I watched Daniel in his expensive suit, watched him try to maintain his composure while his lawyers argued for reduced charges, for leniency, for understanding. Laura cried through most of the proceedings, her attorney trying to paint her as simply following her husband's lead. But the emails told a different story. She'd been an equal partner in planning my erasure. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Martinez, showed no sympathy. When Daniel's attorney argued that his client had simply been overzealous in trying to protect his aging mother, Judge Martinez cut him off. "Protect her?" she said, her voice cold. "Your client drugged his mother to make her appear incompetent. He forged her signature. He systematically isolated her from her support system. He wished for her death in writing. That's not protection. That's abuse. And this court takes it very seriously." In the end, Daniel pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. He received 3 years in prison for elder abuse and fraud, with an additional 2 years suspended sentence and 5 years probation after release. Laura received 18 months and probation. They were also ordered to pay restitution, every penny they'd fraudulently transferred, plus legal fees, plus damages. The total came to over $300,000. But the criminal case was only part of their punishment. The civil consequences were devastating. The board of directors at the family company, the business my husband built and I'd helped save, voted unanimously to remove Daniel as CEO. The scandal had made headlines in the local business community, and they couldn't afford the association. They installed an independent CEO, someone with no family connection, and the company actually began to thrive without Daniel's mismanagement. I remained on the board as founder and primary shareholder, attending meetings and making my voice heard. The business that Daniel thought he was entitled to continued without him, proving he'd never been as essential as he believed. Laura filed for divorce before Daniel even went to prison, trying desperately to salvage her own reputation and financial situation. But the damage was done. Their friends abandoned them. Their country club membership was revoked. The private school asked them to withdraw their children due to family circumstances. They lost their house to foreclosure. They'd been living far beyond their means, counting on my assets to bail them out. My grandchildren, Emma and little Robert, were the innocent casualties of their parents' greed. Sarah and I were granted supervised visitation rights, and I got to maintain a relationship with them, though it was complicated and painful. I had to explain in age-appropriate ways why their father had done something wrong, why Mimi couldn't see them at their house anymore. Emma, at 7, asked me once, "Mimi, did Daddy try to hurt you?" The question broke my heart, but I answered honestly, "Yes, sweetheart, but I'm okay now, and I'm always going to be here for you." I sold the family house, on my own terms, to a lovely young family with 3 children who would fill it with laughter and love again. I didn't need that much space, and honestly, the memories had been poisoned. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo near the beach with floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony where I could watch the sunrise. It was mine, chosen by me, paid for with money I'd earned through my own decisions. For the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. I enrolled in art classes at the community college, the dream I'd postponed for 50 years when I gave up my scholarship. My instructor said I had natural talent, that my paintings showed emotion and depth. I cried the first time someone wanted to buy one of my pieces, not because of the money, but because someone valued something I'd created, something that was purely mine. I reconnected with my sister Ruth, who came to visit for 2 weeks and ended up staying for a month. We talked late into the night about our childhood, our parents, the lives we'd lived. She apologized for believing Daniel's lies, for not calling, for letting me be isolated. I forgave her. Life was too short for grudges, and she hadn't been the villain, just another one of Daniel's victims. I joined a support group for elder abuse survivors and found a community of people who understood what I'd been through. We shared our stories, our pain, our victories. I realized how lucky I'd been. Many of them hadn't caught their abusers in time, had lost everything, had no legal recourse. I started speaking at senior centers, at community events, telling my story and encouraging others to watch for warning signs, to protect themselves, to fight back. I worked with local legislators on a bill to strengthen elder abuse protections and make conservatorship processes more transparent. My case had exposed loopholes in the system, ways that predatory family members could manipulate the courts. If my pain could prevent someone else's suffering, then maybe it had meaning. Sarah moved back from Seattle, taking a job transfer to be closer to me. We had dinner together twice a week, real conversations where we talked about everything: her career, her dating life, my art classes, our plans for the future. She told me once, "Mom, I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I was so focused on my own life that I didn't see what Daniel was doing." I held her hand and told her the truth. "You're here now, that's what matters." Slowly, painfully, I built a new life. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd expected, but a good life nonetheless. A life where I mattered, where my voice was heard, where I was valued for who I was, not what I could give. I was no longer just someone's mother, someone's victim, someone's target. I was Margaret Thompson, artist, advocate, survivor, warrior, and every morning when I woke up in my sun-filled condo, looked out at the ocean, and made my coffee exactly how I liked it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not because Daniel was punished, though justice did bring some satisfaction, but because I'd stood up for myself. I'd refused to disappear. I'd fought back and won. And in doing so, I'd reclaimed not just my assets or my independence, but something far more valuable: my sense of self, my dignity, my right to exist on my own terms. Daniel was in prison, facing the consequences of his choices. Laura was rebuilding from ruins of her own making, and I was finally, truly, completely free. 2 years after that devastating Saturday afternoon when I'd confronted Daniel across my dining room table, I stood on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of coral and gold. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, waves rolling in with their eternal rhythm, and I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever: genuine contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, now 9 years old. She'd sent me a photo of a drawing she'd made in art class, a house with flowers and 2 stick figures labeled "Me and Mimi." Despite everything that had happened, despite the complexity and pain, Sarah and I had maintained our relationship with the children. They spent every other weekend with me now, and those days were filled with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love that reminded me why family, real family, was worth fighting for. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that terrified moment of discovery to this peaceful evening. It hadn't been easy. There were still nights when I woke up crying, grieving not for the son who went to prison, but for the boy I'd believed he was. There were still moments when I questioned everything. Had I been too trusting, too naive, too giving? But my therapist, a wise woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in trauma recovery, had helped me understand something crucial. Daniel's choices were not my failure. His greed, his cruelty, his willingness to hurt me. Those were reflections of who he'd become, not deficiencies in how I'd loved him. The truth I'd learned, slowly and painfully, was that you can do everything right as a parent and still end up with a child who disappoints you. You can sacrifice everything, give unconditionally, love without limits, and still be betrayed. Because ultimately, every person makes their own choices. I'd given Daniel values, opportunities, and endless love. What he chose to do with those gifts was on him, not me. But I'd also learned something more hopeful. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. Society tells older people, especially older women, that we should be quiet, accommodating, grateful for whatever scraps of respect we're given. We're supposed to fade into the background, make ourselves small, accept diminishment as the natural order of things. I'd almost believed that narrative. I'd almost let them erase me without a fight. The moment I decided to fight back wasn't just about money or property. It was about refusing to accept that my life, my voice, my very existence could be dismissed as inconvenient. It was about reclaiming my right to matter, to make decisions, to be seen as a full human being rather than an obstacle or a burden. My story had resonated with more people than I'd ever imagined. After several news outlets covered the case, I'd received hundreds of letters and emails from people sharing their own experiences. Adult children stealing from aging parents, spouses manipulating their partners, families torn apart by greed disguised as concern. Each story broke my heart, but they also fueled my determination to keep speaking out. I'd testified before the state legislature twice now, helping to pass stronger protections for elderly citizens. The Margaret's Law Bill, as they'd nicknamed it, required multiple independent medical evaluations before conservatorships could be granted, mandated court-appointed advocates for proposed conservatees, and created serious criminal penalties for financial exploitation of the elderly. It wasn't perfect, but it would help. It would make what Daniel tried to do to me harder for others to accomplish. I'd also started a foundation with some of the restitution money Daniel had been forced to pay back. The Thompson Foundation for Elder Justice provided free legal assistance to seniors facing financial abuse, funded counseling services, and created educational programs to help older adults recognize warning signs of exploitation. Every month, we help someone fight back against a predatory family member, a fraudulent caregiver, or an exploitative friend. Every victory felt personal. Sarah had become my partner in this work, using her business expertise to run the foundation while I served as the public face and advocate. We'd grown closer than we'd ever been, not just as mother and daughter, but as partners in a mission that mattered. She told me recently, "Mom, what Daniel did was horrible, but watching you transform that pain into purpose, that's changed my life too. You've shown me what real strength looks like." As for Daniel, he'd been released from prison 6 months ago. He'd written me letters while incarcerated, dozens of them, ranging from angry to apologetic to pleading. I'd read the first few, hoping for genuine remorse, for the son I'd known to emerge from behind the greed and entitlement, but his apologies always came with excuses, with attempts to minimize what he'd done, with suggestions that I'd somehow overreacted. I stopped reading them eventually. Patricia advised me that maintaining the restraining order was wise, and I'd agreed. Maybe someday, if Daniel did the deep internal work necessary to truly understand and own what he'd done, there could be some kind of reconciliation. But that day hadn't come yet, and I'd learned that I didn't need his redemption to find my peace. The sunset was deepening now, the sky transforming from coral to deep purple. I raised my coffee mug, decaf these days, doctor's orders, in a silent toast to the woman I'd become. Not despite the betrayal, but in some strange way, because of it. I'd discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned that vulnerability and power could coexist. I'd found my voice and refused to be silenced. I thought about all the people watching my story, hearing my message, and I wanted them to understand something fundamental. You are never too old to start over. You are never too powerless to fight back. You are never too tired to demand justice. Your life has value not because of what you've given to others, but because you exist. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your voice matters. And to the adult children out there, the ones taking their parents for granted, treating their sacrifices as obligations rather than gifts, viewing their aging parents as inconveniences or opportunities. I had a message for them too. Your parents are not banks. They are not infinite resources to be drained. They are human beings who loved you before you could love them back, who sacrificed dreams you'll never know about, who gave you life itself. Respect is not optional. Compassion is not weakness, and greed will destroy everything you think it will gain you. The bonds of family should be sacred, but only when they're built on mutual respect, genuine love, and basic human decency. Blood relation doesn't give you the right to exploit, manipulate, or harm. And if you think your aging parents are helpless, that they'll go quietly, that they'll accept being erased, think again. We survived wars, economic crashes, decades of challenges you've only read about in history books. We're stronger than we look, smarter than you assume, and done accepting disrespect. I'd also learned the hard truth that not all betrayals can be prevented. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most deeply. But betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you finally put yourself first, where you recognize your own worth, where you refuse to disappear to make someone else's life easier. My message to anyone facing what I faced, whether it's financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, or systematic diminishment, is this: document everything. Trust your instincts. Seek help before you think you need it. Build a support system outside your immediate family. Know your rights. And most importantly, know your worth. You are not a burden. You are not an obstacle. You are a person deserving of dignity, respect, and agency over your own life. And if you're already in the midst of fighting back, if you're tired and scared and wondering if you have the strength to continue, you do. I promise you, you do. Every day you stand up for yourself is a victory. Every boundary you enforce matters. Every time you refuse to accept mistreatment, you're reclaiming your power. It's hard, it's painful, but it's worth it. You're worth it. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, I went inside my small, perfect condo and looked at the painting I'd completed that week, an abstract piece in bold reds and golds that my art instructor said captured the essence of transformation and rebirth. I didn't know if it was technically good, but it was mine. Created by my hands, expressing my truth, existing because I'd finally given myself permission to create rather than just sacrifice. This was my resolution, not just the legal victory, not just the justice served, but this life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. A life where I mattered, where my choices determined my days, where I was no longer defined by what I gave, but by who I was. Never underestimate someone who's survived a lifetime of battles. We know how to fight because we've already won wars you can't imagine. Family isn't defined by blood, but by honor, respect, and genuine love. Greed destroys everything it touches. corrupting even bonds we think are unbreakable. But dignity, once reclaimed, becomes unshakable. Your worth isn't measured by your sacrifices or your usefulness to others. It's inherent, undeniable, and yours to defend. And remember, it's never too late to stand up, speak out, and refuse to disappear quietly into someone else's convenient narrative. So now I want to hear from you. What would you do if your own child, the person you'd sacrificed everything for, betrayed you like Daniel betrayed me? Would you fight back, or would you walk away? Have you or someone you love experienced elder abuse or financial exploitation? Share your thoughts, your stories, your advice in the comments below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you to check on your aging parents or grandparents with genuine concern rather than calculating interest, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful true stories about courage, betrayal, justice, and the incredible strength we find when we refuse to be victims. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe an elderly parent who seems isolated, maybe a friend going through something similar, maybe an adult child who needs a reminder about respect and compassion. Remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. You are never too powerless to demand justice. You are never too tired to start over. Your life has value. Your voice matters. And your story isn't over until you decide it is. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of a community that believes in justice, dignity, and second chances. Don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that this message is reaching people all around the world. Until next time, stand strong, speak your truth, and never let anyone convince you that you don't matter. Because you do. We all do.